Hello there, my name's James Kelly and welcome back to Scot Goes Pop. So I've been asked what I think about Mhairi Black's decision to leave the SNP, and I think it's unfortunate for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because she's such a rare talent. She's someone who could very authentically speak the language of the urban working class and cut through to those people in a way that the vast majority of politicians can't. Whatever the many talents of people like Kate Forbes or John Swinney, they don't speak that language, and so she was a tremendous asset. And I don't know whether she ever really saw herself as ever becoming the leader of the SNP, but if in some alternate universe she had done, well, it could have gone one or two ways. It could have been a disaster, or it could have worked brilliantly. She could have, led the party to great success. She could have been like a sort of working class folk hero like Tommy Sheridan and led the party in that way very successfully. And potentially in that alternative universe, she could have led us to independence. So it's a great shame that her talents are no longer going to be available to the SNP. The other reason it's unfortunate is that although I disagree strongly with some of her specific views on identity politics, on the trans issue in particular, you really want those views to be represented in numbers in the SNP, because you want the SNP to be a broad church. When it's been successful, the SNP has always been a broad church. But this is where the paradox is with Mhairi Black's departure, because, obviously I rejoined the SNP only about 6 months ago. And when I left the SNP in 2021, early 2021, which in retrospect I regard as a mistake, but obviously that was for reasons I couldn't anticipate. I didn't realise that Alba were going to become such a Stalinist freak show. But when I did leave the SNP, one of my reasons was, ironically, that it become not enough of a broad church that had gone in the other direction. And part of the reason for that was exactly people like Mhairi Black being so intolerant and saying her views had to be universally held across the party, otherwise you were bigots. And, you cannot keep the party a broad church in that way. And if you think about what the SNP would have had to have done to have kept Mhairi Black on board, the steps it would have had to have taken would have alienated so many people that the SNP would have been less inclusive, not more so. For example, one of the things that Mhairi Black specifically said was that she didn't approve of the senior position that Kate Forbes has been given. She can't even live with Kate Forbes as deputy first minister, let alone as first minister. Are we really saying that somebody with Kate Forbes' views, which are shared by a lot of people, but in particular somebody of Kate Forbes' talents, should have no place at all in government, even in deputy role? I think that's pushing it somewhat. If the SNP are going to remain united, they're going to remain connected to the mainstream opinions of the Scottish public. And I think this perhaps speaks to the, how can I put this, lack of wisdom of the views that some people held about the prospect of Kate Forbes actually becoming SNP leader, that it couldn't happen, specifically because you would lose MPs like Mhairi Black and potentially MSPs as well. And yet, okay, perhaps if Kate Forbes had become leader, maybe one or two MPs would have defected to the Greens or become independent MPs, and perhaps the same would have happened to MSPs. But think about what else would have happened if Kate Forbes had become leader. Because I have it on reasonably good authority that if Kate Forbes had become SNP leader in 2023, Alex Salmond would have rejoined the SNP, and he didn't have the power to literally just wind up the Alba party, but he would have strongly advised everybody else in Alba to come back across to the SNP, and at a stroke, that Berlin Wall would have come down. The Cold War within the independence movement would have been at an end, and so the loss of one or two MPs like Mhairi Black would have been more than offset by the healing effect of Kate Forbes becoming leader. And that's the great tragedy of what happened in 2023, that great opportunity was lost. And although I was surprised when I heard about this understanding that perhaps Alex Salmond had with the Kate Forbes camp, that he would have rejoined the SNP if she had won, when I thought back to that period, actually, it was completely consistent with something I noticed at the time, just before the announcement of the SNP leadership election in 2023. You might remember that there was this Twitter account, which I sort of semi-suspected of being Alex Salmond incognito, because it had a sort of an unusual intelligence behind it. It was pro-Alba, but it was, it had his sense of humour, his really barbed, quite aggressive sense of humour, sort of attacking sarcasm, if you know what I mean, directed at individuals that could wound, and yet would have this sort of humour and intelligence behind them. The account was based in Aberdeenshire, and in Mr. Salmond's part of the world. It was full of knowledge about sort of niche subjects that he knew a lot about. So I did begin to suspect it was him, and then I changed my mind about that, because there was one day when the account sort of tweeted while Alex Salmond was actually presenting a TV programme live. So that couldn't have been him, whereas unlikely he would have been tweeting in the middle of a live broadcast. And after Mr. Salmond's untimely death, I think that account carried on tweeting. So it seemed not to be him. But there again, maybe there was a sort of like a half-truth in my suspicion. Maybe that account was, to use the euphemism, very close to Mr. Salmond's thinking, if you know what I mean. And if that is the case, and something that account said just before the SNP leadership announcement would have been very significant, because it said, whatever happens when the vote is announced, I'm hoping for some free transfers. And I interpret that as meaning, if Humza Yousaf won, he was hoping that disaffected SNP members would come across to Alba. But if Kate Forbes won, he was expecting and anticipating, and he knew, in fact, that he would be welcomed back into the SNP, and that the Alba experiment, which I think he was tiring of, would have been over. And, you could have seen that as a win both ways scenario. He thought he could win both ways, but actually I think he very much wanted Kate Forbes to win. He wanted to rejoin the SNP. That's where his heart was. And I know that towards the end in Alba, he was becoming more and more open with people he trusted, that he regarded Alba as effectively as a failure, that it hadn't worked out, and he was very sad and disaffected about it. So that great opportunity was lost, and having John Swinney as leader with Kate Forbes as his deputy is not the same thing. It hasn't healed the divide in the same way, but it's sort of like half a loaf. We're in a better position than we were in when Humza Yousaf was leader. And so if that process is effectively inconsistent with Mhairi Black remaining a member of the SNP, then although that's very unfortunate, perhaps this is something that just had to happen. It was an inevitable side effect of a process of the SNP getting back to where it needed to be. So that's my thoughts on Mhairi Black's departure from the SNP. So that's it for now, but if you're enjoying this content, please do subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.